Okay, so I am back, and Paddington is home, so the band is back together again, and we are going to wait for folks to get on, and then we will bring back in Miss Bonilla. Hi, bud. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Well, thank you.
So much blame.
Thank you.
Not too much social distance.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Thank you again.
No problem. So, Monday or tomorrow?
We will do it tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Okay, love. Thank you. In the queue, Miss Bonilla. Yes, you are. Hi, bud.
Yay, it worked.
Hello. We are back.
Okay, great. Well, I'm glad we have more time because I wanted to ask you some more about American Dirt, the controversy.
Oh, okay. All
So
right.
tell me how you saw that and your thoughts on all that.
So in watching the American Dirt controversy, it made me ask a lot of questions of myself, such as um, what we were talking about earlier. Do I have, am I doing something to unfairly take advantage of a privilege that I have? It just did not occur to me that I might have a privilege that other people don't when it comes to telling a story. I mean, to me, it's always been very simple. Like I go out and I tell a story. But watching watching that just made me ask some questions of myself. It was interesting. The town hall that Oprah did was a little uncomfortable to watch. It was a little soothing to the soul to see. I think in life, when we see consternation, we want to see some type of resolution. I think it's a
Mm.
natural human, like I need to know that it's going to be okay. And I
Yeah.
think I think I was one of those people, like, is this going to be okay, like by the time it's over, because it sure seemed a little like, ooh. But it was honest. It was real honest. And so, as for I have not read the book. I was actually there. Was I there the morning Oprah and the lady were there? No, I wasn't. I'm thinking I was, but I wasn't. The day that she showed up, and then I found out, interestingly, that she was, I guess her grandma was Puerto Rican or something like that. And so I went to follow her on social media, and I think I saw a couple of posts of mine that she reposted. But that was really all I knew about her,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
Um,
Did the experience, and I appreciate what you're saying about there wasn't a resolution, but I think that that's important. For me, there's, as an anthropologist, there's all sorts of tensions, similar to journalism, of telling people stories, of, how you're representing them, of also making a career and profiting in some ways off of other people's stories and tragedies, etc. And I think those are tensions that are never resolved. And I think if they're resolved, you're doing it wrong. I think if you feel if you feel the discomfort and you feel the tension and it keeps you on your toes, to me, that's doing it right. Because there's no simple answer to any of these questions, I don't think.
you're right. You're right. And listen, as much as I subscribe to what you're saying and I believe in it, uh, it's always a little uncomfortable. And that's when you really know you're doing, I think, some powerful stuff, is when the person sitting at home is a little uncomfortable. You expect that the people in the chair might be uncomfortable. But like when the audience at home is like, ooh, I mean, I remember watching that town hall and I was like, oh my gosh, what is that lady gonna say next? Like, is she gonna come after Oprah, or is Oprah gonna be? It was something. But again, it was a valuable opportunity for a white man to sit back and look and say, okay, so maybe. I mean, quite honestly, Miss Bonilla, here's what I thought. Should I in the future ask whether a Latino or a Latina should tell the story? Maybe I shouldn't tell the story. maybe having the, you know, because I'm really big about diversity in the stories that I do. So like I did a story this week about the new normal, and we had a Puerto Rican guy who was in Nashville. We had a white girl who was in Houston. We had a, I believe, an Iranian lady who was in New York. And then we had one of my colleagues who's a white gentleman. And so quite diverse. And so I'm always about getting that in my stories, but it made me think, like, are there some times where maybe the bosses should say, no, we want her to do it because she is a part of that community. But then it also makes me think, like, when I think of LGBTQ issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't ever want to go cover an LGBTQ story and have them go, well, they sent the gay guy to do it, you know, or just as stupid as it would be if we sent a woman to cover issues involving women at the Supreme Court and they were like, oh, they sent a lady to do it, you know, so
Yeah.
it just, I don't know.
Or yourself as a reporter being pigeonholed into the queer beat, you know, like, and that's what you have to cover because that's who you are, right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And but you also have to realize that for me, that possibility has been an evolution, because for so long I lied
Right.
about who I was, and so if you would have tried to put me on the queer beat, I'd have run for the hills, right? and if you would, I would have lived. And this is sad to say. This is sad to say, but it's the truth. I would have been so insulted to get that beat, because even though I am gay, getting to the place of acceptance was a long, difficult journey. And only now can I look at that with the respect that it deserves. Just that, to see, if I were to ever see somebody say, like, you know, the queer beat, I know we're using it as a euphemism, but the queer beat, like, now I can say, oh yeah, that's a community to be served. Or the trans, you know, like the story of Alexa. I think one reason I've been so passionate about covering it is because I have sat across from transgendered persons at the Gay and Lesbian Journalism Conference and watched some back and forths that got very uncomfortable from people in the transgender community who do not feel represented by the LGBT community telling their stories. So when I went to do the Alexa story, I thought, oh, number one, I want to do it. Number two, it wasn't, and that's another example of how my organization I have so much respect for, because it was in Puerto Rico. It involves a train. It was like 4 different elements of diversity that are underrepresented, that are boxes that everybody usually doesn't check, right? And they believed in it, and they said, go do it. And then they gave me 4 minutes to tell it on television. But as I did the story, oh, let me give you one example. I have not told this. There was an individual, I won't say who was interviewed in the story, who was very unhappy with how it turned out. Very unhappy. And went on social media and made their unhappiness known. And basically what they said was, my identity and story was reduced to a soundbite. Well, number one, my ego got triggered. And my ego said, how could you be criticizing me when I interviewed you and put you in this, right? So, and then I had to say, wait a minute, hold on, your ego's getting triggered here, like sit out for a minute. And then I realized this, that opportunity was maybe the first or one of the few times that opportunity has ever been given. Number two, you have to realize that in underserved communities, when that opportunity is given and it's not there, sometimes we have to explain to people that you're not going to see all 30 minutes of the interview we did, right? Because people who may not watch the news regularly may not realize that we're not doing a half-hour documentary. I might interview you for 20 minutes, but we take 1 or 2 sound bites. So what I did was I didn't take it personally. And I had already planned to. I put the entire raw interview online, to which the individual immediately updated and said, it's on, I'm thankful, da da da. So it was a process. But I came away from telling Alexa's story a little like, because when you cover communities that you don't belong to, you never know what may offend or trigger or lead to something like that. And so It keeps me on my toes. It keeps me on my
I
toes.
love it that it was like some trans Puerto Ricans that checked you.
Totally, totally,
That makes sense to me, actually.
totally, totally.
but but I think that you know, that it might be something to think more about in terms of, you know, who like people who have felt that they haven't had any chance to tell their story, that or that their story hasn't even been told at all, you know. And so, and I think on the one hand, part of why Puerto Ricans are so generous with you and love you so unconditionally is because we're not used to seeing our stories told. We're not used to seeing people, you know, putting us on the national news, taking us seriously. And so, you know, that is a responsibility, but, you know, there's also lots of ways in which you can use both your platform at CBS and your social media platforms to help other people, you know, tell their own stories. Or, you know, I noticed that you've done this. You actually have done this on Instagram, the different times that you put like things that people send to you, these different stories that you have archived, you know, these Puerto Rico stories. You know what I'm talking about? These text messages and stuff?
Of course, because what I've realized is my bandwidth for being able to get everything. If you guys knew how many messages I get on a daily basis, it would overwhelm you. It's upwards of 200 to 500 a day. And so those that I am able to go through, if it doesn't require further investigating or reporting, or if there's enough context kind of included, I will simply take that message and post it, because it's a way of saying, I hear you. I want to make sure you are heard. And these are issues that sometimes don't, or they don't need, or they can't involve further looking into. So I kind of go through it and I post it. And yeah, and people do appreciate it. Some people, it's funny, some people now get in the habit of, they'll write to me and they'll be like, "Dear David, please do not post this. But I wanted you to know."
But that's good, you know, that's good to make it clear. Yeah.
100%. Absolutely.
I also really loved, you launched a hashtag campaign where people started responding. I'm like, oh my God, is the entire Puerto Rican diaspora going to respond to David Begnaud? Like, how, I don't know how you managed that Twitter traffic, but that was amazing also. You know?
Yeah.
What was the hashtag? Just like share your story? I don't remember what it was.
I think it was share your story, and then last night I think I used new normal, but it was share your story. And I have to say, Instagram has proven to be the most successful platform when it comes to galvanizing engagement on something.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it has, for whatever reason. So I think I have the largest audience on Facebook, but for whatever reason, Instagram tends to be, I don't know what it is about Instagram. I don't think it's just because there's arguably more young people maybe on Instagram than the other platforms. But yeah, that's just how it is. And the story platform I found on Instagram to be very useful for both sharing and engagement. Because a lot of times, Ms. Bonilla, people will say to me, "David, this is going on." And in that moment, I so badly don't want to say, "I have no time to deal with this, I'm sorry." So what I will so often say is, and this just happened the other day, Lorenzo, Puerto Rico farmer, came to me and he was red hot. He had something like 1,000 pounds of cilantro, and he sells to restaurants, but they're closed, and he wants to sell it on the side of the road, and they were being arrested. And he said, "David, this is not okay." And so I said to him, "Lorenzo, do me a favor. Send me a video. Tell me, 'Hi, David, my name is, and here's my issue.' And I will post it." And sometimes that's all I have the time and bandwidth to do, but it works. We posted it. I reached out to the Department of Agriculture. 24 hours later, they said, roadside workers will be allowed to sell fruit and stuff, but you can do it in a drive-through form. So we brought Lorenzo back on last night. He updated everybody. He told us that was the case. So again, that's why I take it so seriously, because something as simple as, "Lorenzo, send me a video," and I post it, was enough to trigger whatever it triggered that got it changed. Now, may not have been me. I'm not saying give all the credit here. I'm just saying it was that which led the spokesperson. I remember when I first started talking to her at the Department of Agriculture, she was like, "Okay, we're starting to hear this. We're starting to hear it." And then I didn't get anything from them. Well, come to find out, that was because they were figuring out what they were going to do, and they decided to change it. And now roadside workers are exempt. You can sell fruit and food on the side of the road in Puerto Rico so long as you have a drive-through.
Yeah, but I do give you a lot of credit because it is somewhat different from the American Dirt situation in the sense that you're not just focused on the stories that you can tell, like you said, like when it exceeds your time, your energy, your bandwidth, which is already very substantial, your time and energy, you still like let other people tell their stories because you recognize that it's not just about your stories, but it's about their stories and
It's
getting them
gone,
out.
it's gone far beyond me. It's gone far beyond me needing y'all to know that I'm doing it. Again, this comes back to I've got the platform. So I've got the platform and Lorenzo's got the concern. Okay, well, let me put it on my platform, right?
Yeah,
And then there are
yeah.
other people who I've worked, I've also tried to hire people who are Puerto Rican to work on our team. And there is one man who's been working with us since the hurricane, and he is fabulous. David Begnaud, shout out to him. He's our fixer, and like I would take that guy anywhere with me. But then there are other people who we've hired freelance whose work one thing I'm careful about when I think when journalists say, well, why didn't he share my work or why didn't he retweet my stuff? A retweet to me is very important because when I'm retweeting your stuff, I'm letting the people who follow me know that I trust everything you're saying. And in this day and age of, well, something may be 80% true, but the other 20% hadn't been checked on, I'm very cautious. Like I'm very cautious before sharing other people's stuff. Before, you just have to be. You got to be. You need to be.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, and well, I think that's why so many people trust you and trust what you're saying too, because they know you're not connected to the political parties. They know that you fact check, and I think it is important to sustain, that credibility. And so, I think it's the right way to go. But so tell me, I wanted to ask you some questions about journalism in general, and my students wanted to know more about, how you approach journalism.
If I may for a moment, just to let everybody who's joined in know, this is Miss
Oh, right.
Yeah, she's a professor at Hunter College, and she reached out to me, and we were talking about sort of this town hall format that I've been doing. And she said, because I'm a researcher and a documentarian, I would like to document some of these stories. And I said, well, I'm only saving them for 24 hours, so I don't know how to help you. And she got some students, and they're sort of working on this project to take these Instagram lives that we're doing. I don't know what she's going to turn it into. I'm excited to see. But she wanted to interview me as a part of the process, and I said, well, why don't we do it on Instagram? And so that's what we're doing. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah. No, and I should repeat that, like, if people had taken any screen recordings of any of these town halls that we might have not been able to archive, to send them to davidnewnormal@gmail.com, and I'll post it also on my Instagram account, which is Daddy Marita. And we've gotten some already from people who have sent them to us, okay, including the woman in Korea who we didn't have that one. Yeah, so
good.
Yes, I'm really glad we got that one. But so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your journalistic practice. At one point we had talked and you said, I keep telling my colleagues that we have to lean into this new journalism. This is what it is. So can you say, and I found it really interesting, the difference that you see between Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. Like, how do you manage all of this? And how do you see each platform operating differently?
It's not easy. The management, what I really want to do is have a team help me manage it. What I don't want to do is have anybody help me manage it. Because when you lose the authenticity and the voice, like people know what my voice is. And my fear is that if other people started posting for me, people would know, excuse me just one second. Hello? Thank you. So this is my new normal. Food is being delivered, and that's the intercom phone where they say delivery. And Paddington is whining. So what was I saying?
That you want someone to manage it, but you don't want people to manage it because you want it to be your voice.
Yeah. So social media, I want it to be my voice. How do I come to understand the platforms? Listen, Facebook is something I put anything and everything on. The Instagram wall that I have, I'm very selective about for reasons I don't understand, but just sort of learning engagement. I only put sort of like big major players on the Instagram wall. On the Instagram story, I post just about anything and everything, right? On my Twitter feed, it is kind of like, I view it as a running news documenting type thing. Like I want people, and I can't tell you how many times people will say, David, I wake up in the morning and I just go through your feed. And then at night, before I go to bed, I just go through your feed. And so I'm mindful of that when I think about, should I tweet that or should I not tweet that? No, maybe I should. It's like sometimes, you know, I have to remember it's important for them. So, you know, I talked to a man today. He and his wife were in Isabela, I believe. She said he worked for CBS. She's Puerto Rican. They moved back after they retired. He doesn't speak any Spanish. And one of his biggest frustrations is there are all these news conferences happening now, and he's not getting anything. So they are coming to me, and I'm sure other people, but they're coming to me to get it in English. And so then that's a reminder to me. It's like, all right, you got to keep your game up, because especially for the important stuff, like this is the kind of stuff those folks need to know. So it's a learn as you go. Yesterday, when I did the interview with the 87-year-old Marine from San Diego, I spent 4 hours editing that on my own. That's a lot of time. And I'll tell you, Ms. Bonilla, what I've become very mindful of in life is that you can make more money, but you can't make more time. And one of the greatest gifts you can give to people is your time. And I am very, very, very happy to give my time to this, but it is exceptionally, exceptionally time consuming. Because I was trying to figure out how to edit on iMovie, and I couldn't figure out how to lay a picture on top without interrupting the audio. And this went on and on. The food is here. Stand by. My new normal. Paddington, that's the food. Thank you very much.
I'm looking at the comments here. If anyone has any questions you want me to ask, feel free to put them in the comment box.
Paddington, that is not for you. Okay, so I'm back. Down.
Yeah, so in terms of social media, so it takes a lot of time, and you're figuring out how to balance that.
As I go, because you know, a lot of my coworkers will come up to me and say, how did this happen? Like, how do I do this? I'm like, I don't even work on the social team, but this is just stuff I've learned as I go. You know, it's a best practices kind of thing. I called somebody who worked on one of our social teams, and I said, how do I use iMovie? And he said to me, he's like, I don't know. I don't use it a ton. And I'm like, oh man, if they don't know, how am I going to know? But I watched a video. But even like last night, I was trying to figure out how to do what we're doing here on Facebook. And so it showed me a video that said you go live and you swipe right, you see the names, you press the button, you get them live. Well, I tried that this morning and it didn't work. I tried it last night and it didn't work. So I'm kind of figuring it out as I go.
I think you need an intern. I'm sure a lot of people would be happy.
I need a cavalry of interns.
So I know you got your food, so I'll just ask you some final questions to wrap up.
Please.
You sure?
I didn't eat breakfast, yeah.
Well, so one question I had was that you're often assigned to the disaster beat. I don't know if that was since Puerto Rico or always. You know, we see you when there's a flood, when there's a tornado. How do you feel about that, and why are you on the disaster beat?
Breaking news has always been a passion of mine. I enjoy being sort of a first responder journalist. I think if I wasn't in journalism, I would be, I don't know if I'd be a police officer, or if I'd be something in service, right? Like trying to help people. Look, I think if politics wasn't so polarizing, I think I'd go into politics.
Really?
Well, but and let me tell you why. Because I love having a problem brought to me and picking up the phone and having it resolved in some way, shape, or form. I love doing that. But politics is so polarizing that if I were to run today, the other side would automatically hate you because of the letter behind your name, and I just don't have any time for that. So yeah.
Be careful saying you like politics, because you know these Puerto Ricans want you to run for office over here.
Listen, that will never happen. I'm more effective where I am, and I will say one thing. Did you see the lady earlier who said her 17-year-old son? It was right before I brought you on. She said her 17-year-old son loves politics, and I have never been to a place here in the States where people were just this obsessed about politics. Yeah, sure, the politician folks are and their staff, but like on the island, everybody is into politics. It is such a thing. And I really got that lesson from Lin-Manuel Miranda's dad when Lin was doing Hamilton and we were doing a story with him, and we went to the college, one of the UPR campuses, and some students stormed the stage. And it made me very uncomfortable. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, why are they just letting this go on? And Lynn's dad finally got up and he said some things to them, because in the States, like, they would just pull you off stage and there were no cops and there were no security. And I was like, this is interesting. And he later sat me down and he explained, he said, listen, protesting is a way of life here, because we have been protesting injustices either by our government or the US government since we were kids. And so this in many ways is not meant as a personal attack on someone. It can be a wider, broader issue. And I was like, oh. And then he said to me, in my 20s, I would have been one of those kids who stormed this stage. And I was like, okay. So.
Interesting. I heard you before. I don't know if it was with the woman from Isabela or who it was, but it was in a context where you were saying, I think it's really important to cover Puerto Rico because it's so vulnerable. And you said this is why it's vulnerable. And you described the Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States. It's the way it's dealing with the fiscal board. You described it so perfectly. I'm like, wow, David is really like, his knowledge of Puerto Rico between when he first arrived and now is amazing. So do you consider Puerto Rico a colony?
So that's a really good question. I don't know if I am educated enough to make the determination, but I will say I have referred to it as a colony before, and I did it on national television. And the first time I did, I remember watching it back and going, "Did I just say that?"
It wasn't a planned intervention. It just came out.
No. It wasn't like a planned. I'm making a statement here. Here's the way I look at it. If the people you're interviewing use the words colonial aspect, it is not my job to take that label away from them. Now, journalism, I do not believe, is about he said, she said. Because between he said, she said is the truth. So what is the truth? So like if someone were to come and say Puerto Rico was a colony of, Italy, we'd be like, okay, that's a lie. Like I'm not gonna let you go on here and say it's a colony. So no, but I do understand the colonial aspect, and the more I have read about it, yeah, clearly it is. And I've never had anybody argue that it's not, So I mean that's sort of where I am on I think the reason I seem a little skittish is I'm leery about people sort of putting a flag in my hand, and I'll tell you what I mean by using that. When I went to the Puerto Rican Day Parade, the one thing my organization was terrified about was me coming into contact with people who would try and use me to make a political point. And there was, I think, the first function before, so the parade was a Saturday, this was a function Thursday night, and I got there and there was a red carpet, and I walked onto the red carpet, and the photographer immediately stuck a flag in my hand and took a picture with it. And the flag that he stuck in my hand was the flag of the lighter color blue. And lighter color blue is not the official flag of the island today. But the lighter color blue represents a large segment of the population in Puerto Rico that identify with it for reasons that you can better explain than I can. But I remember feeling so uncomfortable in that moment because people will sometimes try and assign things or get me to sort of put a flag in the sand, no pun intended, to make a point. And so I'm always careful to say I have very strong opinions. But my opinions are totally irrelevant, right? What is relevant is you've got an opinion, you've got a voice. I want to make sure people hear it, and that's where I put the period.
Yeah. Has anyone asked you to take a position on status?
Absolutely, all the time. all the time. I think people are very curious to know. And quite frankly, I would be curious to know if I wasn't David Begnaud, what David Begnaud thought. Because here's this guy who loves us and is always here and is representing us. I wonder what he thinks. These are not people who I think are trying to screw me over. These are people who just genuinely want to know, what do you think? And by the way, in private conversations with my partner knows what I think, and we have wonderful discussions. But I don't ever want to be involved in a discussion where I give an opinion. It would be defeating. It would defeat the purpose that I'm trying to serve.
Yeah. I think for me, I recently did an event at Hunter College, and someone asked me what they thought the practical or pragmatic consequences were of my refusal to take a position on status or to promote one particular political party in Puerto Rico. And they assumed, because I'm so critical of certain things, they just assumed that I was pro-independence or that I, supported the alternative parties. And, I had to explain, first of all, that I think it's really important for me to speak to all Puerto Ricans, regardless of their ideology. So I want to make sure that at least most of what I say, like that people who are pro-statehood could understand it, people who are pro-independence could understand it, or at least not deny it, even if they don't agree with it.
Let me say this to you. When I first got there, I assumed that everybody wanted statehood.
Really?
Or because of my privilege. And I've only come to really understand what this word privilege means beyond the usual use of it. But I grew up in a state, and I grew up with voting representation, and I grew up with all this kind of stuff. And the power didn't go out all the time, and the water didn't look brown all the time. So when I got there, I remember thinking, well, of course they need to be a state. They need to be a state because they need X, Y, Z. And then we were doing a documentary, which I still am so glad we did that half-hour documentary. And I remember we interviewed, my team set up a group of people in Old San Juan in this beautiful second-story flat, and we did it. And I'm telling you, those people rocked my world. I walked in, and I just assumed that they would say, well, yes. And they were all, I would say, 35 or younger, and most all of them were opposed to statehood. Most all of them were opposed to statehood. And I was like, I said to myself, you really have a lot to learn. Like, you really have a lot to learn in terms of listening to where this is coming from. And so thereby started me on my journey of realizing why they don't want it, or maybe why they do want it.
Yeah. So what do you say when folks who are not Puerto Rican ask you, well, what do Puerto Ricans want?
To be heard. To be heard.
But and in regards to status, what do you say?
No. I never am asked about status from someone who's not Puerto Rican.
Oh, really?
I never get a status question from someone who's not Puerto Rican.
Only Puerto Ricans are obsessed with that?
Well, I think only Puerto Ricans are arguably aware of that. I think thereby lies the awareness issue, right? Where people who are not Puerto Rican don't understand what is the biggest discussion. I mean, Ms. Bonilla, every conversation I have with someone at some point trickles back to whether it starts with, ends with, or in the middle, status. Everything. Here in the States, it's Republican or Democrat. In there, it's like status. Everybody wants to talk about status. And so I've never had someone who's not Puerto Rican talk to me about the Puerto Rican status. Nobody. And I think that is an awareness issue. And listen, it's one area where I'm a little reluctant to do it. There's a whole lot of people who want me to, do like a town hall about status. And I think it would be fascinating. But guess what? You got to get that right. You got to get that right. And I don't quite know how to get it right yet.
Yeah. So what do non-Puerto Ricans ask you repeatedly? If the power is back?
Is the government as bad as they seem? They ask me, is it still as bad as it was Maria? They ask me how many people like Trump. They ask me whether I bought a house there. They ask me why I care so much about it. They ask me, is it better?
Yeah. So what do you say when they ask you if the government is as bad as it seems?
I tell them in many ways it's exactly as bad as it seems. Yeah, but I also provide the necessary context that you can't blame today's governor or the one before today's governor for the problems of today. You need to blame the last 10 governors, right? You need to go back to Daddy Rosselló and before, who set the island on a crash course, right? I mean, the train started to derail 25 years ago. And so but again, what I've realized in my business is when you come from a place of wanting to get them, um, people shut down. At the end of the day, Ricardo Rosselló, who was uh, smart, charismatic, and a liar, um, was an individual who was the governor of the island. And you may not like, just like Mr. Trump, who people may not like, Mr. Trump, who, I mean, I've never been in a position, Ms. Begnaud, where you had to fact check statements that come out the White House before you put them out, but that is the world that we now live in. I introduced those two gentlemen to say they are both the heads of government. And whether you like them or not, you have to deal with them. And I prefer to deal with people um, humanely and politely. I think even when you're dealing with people like Rosselló, who at the very last press conference, I was the last person to ask questions. I had 8 questions, and I could tell he was like, if the press conference would have ended before he got to me, I think he'd have been so excited. And I think there were so many people wanting me to ask him about why they said what they said about me in their chats, right? And he was critical about the report I did about crime on the island. He said it was going to kill tourism and that kind of stuff. I didn't ask him about that once. I never asked anybody about it because I didn't want to indulge him and give him the satisfaction of making him think that I cared, number one. And number two, that's not important. Him not liking the report we did, there are tons of politicians who don't like the report we do. Get in line and take a number, right? You have to deal with these folks.
Well, and in lots of ways, that was a badge of honor. To be put down by the governor in the chat meant that you were a good journalist, right?
100%. But beyond that, people needed necessary information. Like, is he going to stay? Is he not going to stay? Who would take over then? How is this going to, I was more concerned in that. It was like, okay, yeah, he's trash talking me. Well, great. Because as the chat showed, they thought that I was one of their little lackeys initially. They thought that they would be able to use me in order to help them. And then when they started realizing that, well, he's not going to engage in this and he's not going to do that, then I think that's when the snark started, and it led to what we saw in the chat.
Yeah. And how's your relationship with the current administration here?
Very professional. The governor, Wanda Vasquez, does not prefer to do interviews in English, and I am respectful of that. I do not want anyone to be uncomfortable when doing an interview. I've only done one interview with her. We were given 20 minutes, and I think she went on for about 40 or 45. Listen, it's frustrating because they don't respond to requests for information quickly, but they at least pick up the phone. So things operate a little differently in Puerto Rico. And one thing I do appreciate about them, which everybody may not realize, is that at least when I put out a report like Dr. Cabanillas, or I put out a report like the lady who died with symptoms of COVID, and we didn't know whether she would be cremated or properly with dignity and humanely treated urgently. When I put out those reports, something happens. And that doesn't happen here in the States. You can put out a blistering report and it just rolls off the back. But at least the island of, I was made aware, I think 20 minutes after that story of the lady who died with the symptoms of COVID, that the governor was aware and she had seen it.
Yeah. I tell people that actually, because people, talk about the corruption here so much, but there also is, in some ways, a greater measure of democracy here. And in some ways, the government listens more, responds more.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And by
Yeah.
the way, I believe that we also need to give acknowledgement where it's due. And Ms. Vasquez was far ahead of every other governor compared to governors in the states from the very beginning. And um, what I've seen since I first got to Puerto Rico was very reactionary. Like the government was just reacting to everything. But arguably, look, I don't know if any governor who went through Maria would have survived. It was an unforeseen disaster on just epic proportions, right? So they were not prepared, but they weren't prepared when Rosselló came into office, because as I've since learned, and this is very important for people who are not Puerto Rican to understand, because the government is the biggest employer on the island. More than 170,000 people work for the central government. The way it works is they come in, they hire friends, family, and otherwise, and then when the new party comes in, usually 4 years later, because there has not been a two-term governor since Ricky Rosselló's dad in the 90s. When the new party comes in, they wipe out everybody who goes to do whatever, and they bring in their friends and family, and that's how the government works. And so because there's no sort of continuity in the mainline folks, the paperwork that would usually stay and the people who would understand the processes are turned over every 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you, it's like Trump comes into office, sure, he got rid of a lot of people at the top level and the medium level, but there are still the mainline workers who've been there for 30 years through various administrations. That doesn't happen in Puerto Rico, and that severely affects the citizens.
Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, part of why there's so much turnover is because a lot of those folks are just political appointees who sometimes don't even have the qualifications. Yeah.
100%.
So it's like the firings sometimes are justified. It's the hirings that are like not necessarily.
Amen. So again, just to wrap up this question, Ms. Vasquez deserves the acknowledgement of acting and not reacting, right?
But how did you feel they were managing the earthquake situation?
The earthquake situation was quite interesting. I tried to get an interview. They weren't responding. And probably one of the most awkward videos that was posted was when I was in Jalco. The government didn't know we were in Jalco. We were live for CBS this morning. My team came up to me and they said, the governor just arrived. And I said, well, let's go say hello. And they were like, are you sure you want to do that? And so I said, well, why don't you go tell them I'm going to walk over and say hello. And so they came back and I could see, and my guy's eyes were pretty big. And he was like, they want to know what you want. And I said, well, I want to ask the governor if there's something she wants. And so
she didn't know that you were there, because a lot of people said, oh, what a coincidence that she shows up where David Begnaud is.
No. I don't think she knew, because she showed up. I think she showed up right after we got off the. I don't know that there's really any way she could have known. Might she have known? Maybe, but I had no way to prove it. So I went over to say hello, and they asked us not. They said she'll talk to you, but just not on camera. So I said, okay, well, we don't have to do an interview. And so her team was rolling with they were holding up a phone, right, for social media. So I told my team, I said, okay, we'll roll on this. And the most awkward thing happened when I walked up. I shook her hand and she said, it's nice to finally meet you. And I said, you too. And I said something to the effect of, what do you need? And I'll never forget her saying, oh, we're good. Like, we have what we need. And I remember walking away thinking, how could she not think that will? So sure enough, the video was posted and people went wild and, predictable.
Yeah.
So that was my first encounter with her. And I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be uncomfortable moving forward. But she was very, very polite. And when we met and did the interview, and I thanked her and we left.
Yeah. I think she's been dealing with the COVID situation. In some ways, there are some things that are working now, but it has also helped take focus away from the report that was going to be made public about what had happened with the warehouses, and she was under a lot of flack for saying not just we're good, but people are happy in the camps and all these kinds of
Well,
things.
I was shocked when she said that the people were happy in the camps. I think she said that during our interview, right? Like they have what they need.
Yes, it was an interview, yeah,
It was,
in
yeah,
the
it was
Fortaleza
during my interview
interview.
that, correct, that she said they have what they need, and people obviously listen. Here's the thing. I will tell you why isn't my charger? I will tell you that you asked me earlier about working with journalists. This is a perfect example of how I'm leaning on journalists on the island to help me out.
Mm-hmm.
This story about the warehouse, and for people watching who may not know, there was a warehouse of undelivered aid that was exposed by a blogger. And it went viral. The governor immediately fired the man who ran the sort of emergency operations center, and she ordered an investigation, and she said, I want the results within 48 hours. And when the 48 hours passed, she said, okay, I got the results, but y'all not gonna know it is confidential. And it was like, okay, whoa, wait a minute. That's not how you said this was gonna work. So she maintained, and she referred it to the Justice Department because she used to be the Attorney General, former prosecutor. So anyway, journalists on the island sued, they won, and they essentially said, there's no reason to keep this secret and confidential. I mean, that's what the judge essentially said. So the report was released. Well, here's a classic example. I don't have the bandwidth and the time right now to go through what is missing from the report because apparently there were some sections that were redacted. So this is an example of where I lean on journalists on the island, like the CPI, to say, here's what it says. And then I share it. You know what I mean? Now, I did share a couple of tweets essentially saying, because you remember the governor came out and said, I've told the Attorney General to fast track the investigation. Okay, excuse me, time out. Why are you telling them how to handle an investigation? Like, that's not your role anymore. So you're the chief executive. Stay out of investigations, you know? So I'm actually waiting. I'm actually waiting to see if I can get a copy of that CPI report in English that I could share. And they're still fighting right now to get more of the redacted sections.
Yeah, I think, you know, the whole COVID situation has kind of turned focus away from all of that, but people aren't going to forget. I don't think that, I mean, people haven't forgotten Maria. They're not going to forget, you know, those warehouse incidents either. So we'll see. So you're going back out into the field next week. So what are you going to be doing? COVID stories? What are you going to be doing?
Oh, for sure. Look, I think COVID-19 will be the story that I cover for the next 3 to 6 months. You know, as the lead national correspondent for CBS this morning, my job is to be on whatever is the lead story. So I imagine this is consuming everything. I mean, it's so different in that, you know, people who otherwise may not watch the news and may only watch sports or whatever, well, sports is canceled. There is no sports on television, right? Sitcoms, movies, all that is stopped. Like the only thing that is sort of current and being updated today, as I look at the television now, Italy reports 793 virus deaths in the last day. That is the most in one day. So they've set a new record today. Yesterday they set a record compared to the day before, and the day before they set a record compared to the day before that. Anyway, I expect to be on this for the foreseeable future, and people are really paying attention. And what I want to do is make sure that we bring what you need to know. Like I just want to forget everything about, you know, morning shows are about getting your day started and kind of making you feel good and giving you a little fun stuff here and there. And as far as I'm concerned, like people just want the information. Like, just tell me where we are, tell me what's going to happen, tell me if we're okay, tell me what I need to worry about. And I'm anxious to be involved in sharing those facts. So I'm looking forward to getting back out.
Yeah. How do you think you'll balance, because people want facts, but at the same time, a lot of people are saying that they're trying to measure their exposure to the news, that they, you know, that it's really depressing them. And I think part of why so many people have been turning, I can only speak for myself, like I've been more interested in watching your feeds and stuff to hear, you know, the impact on daily lives, and to kind of balance that out with, you know, the news of Italy, etc. How do you think your coverage, how are you going to balance that? Are you going to just depress us all, David?
So I really look for opportunities like the 87-year-old Marine. Because when I got the call saying they want to talk to you, I was so excited. I was like, oh my, would I like to do it? Are you kidding me? Absolutely. Because I knew that that would be a positive story of hope on a relevant issue like this.
Right,
you know, there are people who want me to follow up on the warehouse, on Alexa, on other stuff that is not related to Puerto Rico. And, you know, I always tell them, I hear you and I know it's important, but this is my front burner issue right now.
Yeah.
And so that's how I do it. That's how I try and stay away from just what seems like bad news and inject the story of this gentleman who survived. But to that point, and I want to say this, I get a lot, not a lot, but I regularly get people who say, where's the good news? You're not telling the good news. Here's the thing. When you share good news, it gets about 15% of the reaction that the bad news.
Really?
Oh, yes. So here's what I say to people. You have to back up what you're asking for. If you want good news, then you have to engage and interact with the good news when it is shared and posted, and you need to make it clear that that is what you want. Because anybody can walk around complaining. But then, you know, it's like people who complain but don't go to vote. Don't complain if you're not going to vote, right? Don't say, I want positive, positive, positive if you're not going to engage with it. Because the engagement, there's plenty of people who want the real news. And the reality, Ms. Bonilla, is that life is really depressing in some ways. That's the reality of life. That's the news flash for everybody. I think the tone in which we deliver it, I think the amount in which we provide it is important to not overloading people. But as we do the positive news, I get a little frustrated because it's like, oh, you said you wanted positive news, but I didn't see any engagement on that.
Yeah. Do you want to do positive news?
I absolutely do, because it is not only positive and hopeful for me, I believe that people benefit from it. Like, here's the benefit from that 87-year-old man. We're being told that people his age are the most vulnerable, especially people who have underlying health conditions. So for him to survive it, somebody like me says, wow. For a doctor who watches the interview, they want to know, what did you treat him with? How did you test him? How long did you monitor him? When did you do this? When did you do, what antibiotic did you use? I mean, this is happening in real time. There aren't any New England Journal of Medicine articles that doctors can go and research to find out how it's been treated around the country.
Yeah.
So
well, and some of the studies coming out of Italy, they say that men are twice as likely to die than women from the virus. So that makes it even more exceptional, his story. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I personally have been trying to, because I'm like a news junkie, and you know, always I like Twitter because I like to be angry and all of that. But in these last few days, I've been trying to balance out, because I've been telling my friends who are just starting now the shutdown in New York, I'm like, oh, I'm going on week 2, and let me tell you, I got food, I got toilet paper. The hardest thing is my mood, you know, like it just, and it's not even like concerned about me and my family because we're safe, but just about what's going to happen in Puerto Rico with the hospital system, like what's going to happen in the world and what this is all going to look like. So I decided like I had to at least see one positive story, and for me it's not just like feel good, like oh, a cute puppy or something. But for example, looking at how people in Asia are starting to get back to normal, you know, or a new normal, right? But how, you know, there's the curve, and the curve comes down, you know?
Here's how we collaborate. What I would ask is when you have something like that you tag me in it, because I trust your research, I know your reputation, I've checked with other people who you know, and I've had personal experiences with you. I would share something that you provided. Right? And that is a collaboration where I can amplify the work of a Puerto Rican like you to provide information that is hopeful. And I agree. You know, pet videos are cute, but I'd rather give you some good news about the current most pressing issue, like what you're talking about.
Yeah. We still want our Paddington Boricua updates, though.
Yeah, you'll still get that. Where are you, buddy? I'm telling you.
I have to say, one of the funniest things that was like the most endearing was when Paddington was sick in the hospital, and that's when I was like, oh my God, why do I care about this dog I've never met, but I do. But also, you were so funny how you reported on his condition. You're like, this is what we know. And so the test came back. And it was like this, like the full David Begnaud news treatment about the dog health situation. It was riveting.
Listen, I felt like there was something for people to learn from that. And if you learn nothing else, it is get pet insurance, because my bill was going to be $20,000. And I walked out of there paying $1,800, and there are people who put their dogs to sleep because they cannot afford. Some people can't afford the $1,700. I am blessed to be able to do it, but I believe experiences in life turn you into evangelizers. So I am a pet insurance evangelist now, where I wasn't a year ago. You know, but it's funny how as life happens, you become sort of a spokesperson on a certain thing. And, you know, I thought, if I'm going to go through this process of pulling my hair out, worrying about my dog, then why don't I share that with other people who are not only going to be interested, but maybe be able to offer support or information or, you know, whatever. And so many people cared about what happened to Paddington. I was like, wow.
I was really weirdly invested. I was like, how's Paddington today? What's happened? And I loved your update. You're like, he's wagging his tail. He's excited to see us. Like, I loved how it was very fact driven, you know?
Always fact driven. I always tell people, even when I interview them, I want the emotion, but right now we're giving me the fact. Like, just stick to the facts. What are the facts?
Yeah. It was wonderful. Well, I have one final question for you. Going off into your COVID coverage and everything, it's a little twist on your question, but what do you fear right now?
I fear the supermarkets closing. I fear layoffs at my company. I fear being laid off. I fear my parents getting sick from it. Yeah, those are some of my fears. Yeah.
I think those are common fears.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for letting me turn the table on you and ask you some questions for a change.
It doesn't happen often, but listen, I love that this is being done with an academic sense of mind, and I'm interested to see what it turns out. There have been many professors over the past 4 years since I started doing work that have analyzed the social media coverage, because I'm fascinated to find out what it is, because I know it's special, and I know it's like I tell people all the time, like, you can't imagine what I experience and deal with on social media with the people who engage and share with it. But the people who do follow it closely, they get it. But I've always said, I wish I could tell the rest of the world that has no clue about it how impactful it has been in their lives, the purpose it is served for them. So I appreciate you and your students doing this. And, you know, we're only in the beginning. God knows how long this is going to go on for.
Yeah. But are you going to keep doing the town halls? No.
I absolutely will. I mean,
you
look,
will?
I'm going to finish with you, and it will have been 3 hours. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to feed Paddington. I'm going to eat my lunch. I'm going to exercise, and then I'll be back on at 8 o'clock.
Awesome. Well, just a reminder, and I'll send you the thing again. Like, if anyone has videos that they want to send us, or that if they want to send us a note, to, you know, explaining what this has meant to them, we would love to hear all that, to be able to document this, because I do think it's important for Puerto Rico. It's important for thinking about journalism, for thinking about what we're all living through with COVID right now. I, as an anthropologist, these are the things that I'm interested in, these kind of cultural texts and ephemeral things that other people don't take seriously and don't take the time to study. To me, there's a lot there that we can learn from. So I thank you for, creating this social experiment.
You are welcome, and I thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, everybody, I'll see you tonight.